Welcome to Rising Stronger Radio, where we explore mental health from a more holistic perspective to empower you to break free from symptoms like anxiety, depression, fatigue, lack of motivation, and addictive behaviors, and instead create an environment both inside and out that is more conducive to healing, vitality, and living a purposeful life. We focus on topics like the power of nutrition, movement, and other lifestyle habits, how to navigate the toxicity and pitfalls of the modern world, as well as philosophical, spiritual, and religious concepts to help you bring out the best in yourself and find your place and purpose in creation. My name is Keith. I'm a holistic health coach and independent mental health researcher. I'm also someone who has faced significant struggles with anxiety, depression, addiction, and other chronic health issues. If you haven't already, you can head over to my website, risingstronger.com, and download my free high mileage foods for mental health guide. I also offer a free 30-minute breakthrough chat if you're interested in personalized guidance and dialing in your nutrition and lifestyle habits to support energy, clarity, and happiness. With that said, let's get into today's episode. All right, welcome back to another episode of Rising Stronger Radio. This is Keith, and in this episode, we're going to talk about concrete signs, somewhere between 15 and 20, that you are in need of healing. And it's not going to be in one area per se, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, but a mix of all of the above. And I wanted to make this because I think it's not always obvious, especially to men, what might not be normal, what might be signs that some of the ways that we are, the ways that we act, the ways that we think, the ways that we feel or don't feel aren't necessarily normal. And it's not just that you want to be normal, it's that they aren't conducive to, or, these places that we might need healing, these gaps that we have or holes aren't conducive to living our lives fully and showing up fully in our lives, both for the people around us, for ourselves, for the people in need, for our, work, careers, for our ability to find our, purpose in life. And I think in the modern world, it's even more difficult because most of the people in the modern world, most of us in the modern world, both male and female, just because of the way that we live, because of the nature of modern life, most of us do have significant, let's say we're significantly in need of healing. And I think one place to start, a less concrete example, but an empirical one that, may ring true to you. It may feel very foreign to hear this idea, but I encourage you to ponder it, to contemplate it. There's a quote by an Indian philosopher, I think you would say, who I'm not super familiar with otherwise, but I've always really liked this quote, that it is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. Now, if you live in modern Western culture, you may or may not realize, but we are the sickest we've ever been chronically in terms of things that we generally do to ourselves. So it's not like, in past times where maybe there's things happening that we can't control or we don't have antibiotics, things like that. The sickness in our culture is largely due to the way that we live. We're more depressed, addicted, unhappy, fatigued, unable to sleep, chronically burdened with headaches and digestive issues and all of these things. And what that quote really highlights is that if you look around yourself at most of the people around you, the people you work with, the people you associate with, and again, I think this is hard for a lot of people, but if you look around and you fit in perfectly, you struggle with the same things that most people do, you tend to do the same things that most people do, maybe like just drinking all weekend, or needing to self-medicate with food, tasty food, sugary food, drugs, alcohol, etc. It's a good sign that you're in need of healing, because as the quote says, it is no sign of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And that's where most of us find ourselves. We blend in with what is extremely abnormal, and let's say, yeah, we'll stick with abnormal, and we don't realize that it's sick, let's say, because it's so normal. It's because we're essentially swimming in dirty waters, to use an analogy like a fish, that we don't even realize that it's abnormal. It's just been that way our whole lives, pretty much. So we're going to get into some more concrete signs, some physical signs, some emotional signs that you can self-identify with and say, maybe I never thought that this wasn't normal. It's just kind of always been that way, or as long as I can remember. Maybe it's different. Maybe you'll hear them and say, yeah, I knew that this wasn't normal, but this is validating to hear that that actually isn't, and that maybe I should take seriously trying to figure it out. But we're going to go through 15 to 20 of these. I'm going to elaborate on some of them, and some I'll just leave where they are if they're more obvious. Because of my work largely with mental health and my experience with mental health, I'm going to start there. So I'm going to say depression and anxiety. In the modern world, and I'm going to elaborate on this one, in the modern world, we tend to think of these things as inevitable, let's say on a medical mainstream level, largely. And this is a generalization, but it's important to kind of see that this is what the overarching consensus is and how these things are handled. Depression and anxiety as inevitable, let's say, chemical imbalances resulting from genetic factors, or largely things outside of our control, or maybe external circumstances, which that is often the case, that we're anxious or depressed as a result of circumstances that are anxiety producing or depressing. But depression and anxiety are intelligent responses from the body and the mind to show us that something is off in our lives. And where we miss this a lot is that they're often showing us that something is off physiologically or physically, with our physical well-being, our body. And we don't generally think of that as much, that depression and anxiety are, often result or reflect our state of physical well-being. But it's important to see that. And either way, it's important to see depression and anxiety as just a call to heal, a call to bring balance into our lives, into our bodies, into our minds. That's really what healing is taking something that's fallen out of balance and bringing it back into balance. And there are, a million and one ways that, or a million and one things that can be healing. It depends on what we're dealing with. But shifting the mindset from anxiety and depression being something that we just need to struggle with, or that's just going to be there, that's going to come and go inevitably, I think is the wrong way to look at it. It's a very incomplete way to look at it. And it's much better to see these things as signs that we need healing, signs that we need to change the way that we are living, the way that we're, potentially the way that we're doing multiple things. And we'll get into that more. I think I might do a whole episode on just the intelligence of anxiety and depression, and really how to see them from a different lens. But they are most certainly calls to heal and not places to get stuck in. And again, I think it's very incomplete and even destructive to see them as things that just require medication or require, let's stay there. Let's stay with medication. The second thing on the list is needing external pleasures to feel good. There's nothing wrong with external pleasure. It's there for a reason, I believe, and it's an important part of life. But what I'm talking about is when we are in constant need of some sort of external hit, whether it's scrolling on social media, eating something that's, like very overwhelming in a sensory, or very, how do I say that? Something that is very stimulating to our senses, to our taste buds. Junk food, needing alcohol, drugs, smoking weed, watching porn. All of these things are reflections that, on an internal level, and I don't mean this arbitrarily, like in a spiritual sense, although that is part of it too. But especially in our world where we live the way that we do, high stress, poor quality food, insufficient sleep, poor quality water, all of these things, biologically and physiologically, most of us have this emptiness. We don't have the resources in us to build. We don't have the building blocks, let's say, to actually feel well without something external. So we're constantly reaching for something to give us a hit, to lift us up. And it's not like that's not necessarily a normal thing. And more importantly, I think it's not something that we should settle to live with, because it doesn't have to be that way. But keep that in mind. Constantly needing these things is a call that we need something to change, that we need to replenish, and that we need to let go in other areas. The third one is fatigue, chronic fatigue, or feeling drained all the time. One of the first people many years ago, probably 10 years ago at this point, that I started learning health ideas from was Paul Chek, who I don't necessarily associate with too much anymore. But what he used to say is that fatigue is the first warning sign from the body that we need to slow down, we need to address something. Next up, and it may be, months, years, tens of years, is a disease. But chronically feeling fatigued is our being crying out to us that we need to slow down, we need to back off, and if not, we need more resources in order to deal with the demands of our lives. But constantly feeling fatigued and drained all the time is not a normal thing. And you can probably, if you can relate to that, understand how much it impacts your life, how much it impacts your ability to work fully or do your work fully, to show up fully, to maybe engage in side projects that, bring you joy and bring you life and feel purposeful, to show up fully for family and friends, etc. It's not the lack of having energy to do is a very hard thing to live with. The fourth one, piggybacking off of that, is a lack of motivation. And that can come again from it can be the result of multiple things, but oftentimes it is biologically. It can be a big indicator in men of low testosterone, just having no motivation to do anything. But on the other end, doing things, especially things that are challenging, and doing things that are meaningful and that aren't necessarily for like a quick fix or a quick hit, can raise testosterone. But also eating the right foods, making sure we have an abundance of the proper nutrients, can help with that as well. But lack of motivation is a sign that we're in need of healing. Fifth one, being unable to fall or stay asleep. This is another big one, I think, in this world. And I think that's going to be my next recorded podcast, is how to fix and optimize your sleep. So keep an eye out for that if you feel like, you either struggle with sleep or you feel like it's not as optimal as it could be. But that is oftentimes a sign of hormonal imbalance or excessive stress hormones throughout the day. The way that we're living is not conducive to our biology if we're unable to fall or stay asleep. So I like to say that sleep troubles are often solved throughout the day, not just at bedtime or not just in the night now or at night. Now, there are definitely ways that you can go about making sleep better. There are definitely ways that you can go about like helping to fall and stay asleep, supplements, evening routines, things like that. But there's a multitude of ways, starting from, the first thing in the morning, that are important and factor into how well we sleep or don't sleep. But that is not something like having to medicate, especially pharmaceutically, for sleep. Not only is that not a solution, it might be short term because just getting sleep going is important, but most of these pharmaceutical sleep medications and drugs are bad news long term and not meant to be used long term, and can really inhibit our sleep and many other things. So it's definitely not something to ignore, though. Sleep is the most powerful medicine that we have, I believe, on like this plane of existence, this world. The next On the list, number 6 is difficulty getting out of bed in the morning. If you really have trouble getting up, and I don't mean like here and there because you were up later or because you really didn't get a good night's sleep, but it's out of nowhere. But if every day it feels like a battle, a serious battle to have to get out of bed, that's often a sign of reverse circadian rhythms. A lot of times, people that have that pattern will also have just be very awake at night. So the reverse, we should be, we should be relatively, or it should be relatively easy to wake up in the morning and get going, and then relatively easy to wind down at night. But it tends to shift for a lot of people in this modern world where it's the reverse. We can't get out of bed in the morning. We almost feel like it's just time to go to sleep, and then at night we're wound up, can't seem to settle down, and have trouble falling and staying asleep. The 7th one is the inability to function without coffee. And I'm not against coffee. I have some coffee here. It's yeah, coffee is not necessarily a bad thing. It's a tool, but most of us don't understand really how to use coffee properly. I'm going to make another video at some point about that too, of how to optimize coffee use and how to make it drinking coffee healthier in the sense that it supports your life and what you want to do, not necessarily about like disease or this or that. But the inability to get going in the beginning of the day without it is definitely a sign, again, that we may have adrenal fatigue, that our bodies can't get going on their own, that we've been pushing too hard for too long, and needing caffeine just to start is it's a warning sign. It's not, it's not like the end of the world, but it's something that we should probably pay attention to. And there are many ways to help with that. There are many ways to kind of reset that. There are ways to back off without it being like a huge withdrawal or without noticing a difference. Like even simple things. I have gotten to the point where I drink mostly decaf with a little caffeine, and that works. I feel as it serves me as much as at the point where I needed multiple cups to get to that point. But again, we'll save how to get there for a different episode. The 8th is excessive stress and a poor response to stress. So if you're feeling stressed a lot of the time, if you just feel like pretty much everything in life stresses you out, and when you are stressed, you can't seem to come back down, or it really gets you worked up, that's a sign that likely, not just psychologically, there are ways to buffer the way we respond to stress by seeing the world differently or seeing our circumstances differently. But it's also oftentimes that we don't have the resources. Stress burns through nutrition, burns through our building blocks. So if we're chronically stressed and not replenishing properly, it can very much impact our ability to deal with stress. The 9th is not responding properly emotionally to things. And that might be that like something sad happens around you, or you're, involved in something, and you just know your emotional response is like blunted, that you're hardened, or you don't really feel. And it can be vice versa. It can be being emotionally, emotionally worked up about everything, even things that aren't that big of a deal, or tend not to be things that we as men get as worked up about. So either direction can be just a sign of imbalance. And again, a lot of these things are physical. It's not like mentally, or it's not just a matter of like how we process things mentally. A lot of times it is our biology that plays into this. The next one is insecurity. I think that this is something that's very pervasive in the modern world. Insecure. Most of us were never really taught how to think for ourselves or how to be independent. We never really had those periods of integration. Men lack a what's the word I'm looking for? A rite of passage in this world, which for most of history was a very important part of transitioning from being a boy to a man. I think it's why we see a lot of addiction and like crazy behavior. I'm including myself there. I'm including myself in almost all of this. Like almost everything that I'm saying here at one point in my life, whether as an adult or a teenager, I've had to deal with. And, as I've gotten older and deeper into understanding health in the mind and body, I've learned how to kind of deal with these things, which is why I'm sharing this. But I think insecurity is a really pervasive thing, and it just hinders our ability to show up fully. I mean, most people, I know this for a fact, and it's how I used to be. We're just left with all these unsaid things, undone things. We don't have the courage or the security with who we are and how we are to do the things that we are called to do, or to act in the ways that we feel are right, etc. You can go down, many examples of that, but I think that insecurity is something that, again, has both biological and psychological and spiritual underpinnings, and that can be overridden for sure. I don't think that, I know that. The 11th one is tuning out a lot. If you feel like you're just dissociating in a sense, or often disconnected from the present moment, have trouble paying attention, trouble sitting and reading, zoning out, trouble being with other people in like, uh, circumstances where you'd like to be able to do that, that is often a sign of, repressed emotions and trauma and stuff that, ideally we are able to work through, because being here is a very important part of being a human. Being present is, I think, again, something that a lot of us lack in, or are unable to really do in the modern world. But it's life changing when we don't have to tune out as much, and that's not an easy thing. I mean, I definitely still struggle with that to some degree, but it's changed a lot over time. The next one is mood swings, number 12. So being up and down constantly, or like going from everything's going well, I'm feeling good about my day, I'm having a good day, to tanking or being really irritable, really angry, or just depressed, not wanting to be around people, feeling sad, any kind of mix of that. That's a good sign that potentially in multiple directions, usually biologically, blood sugar issues resulting from what we're eating, excessive carbohydrate intake, lots of sugar, or just poor digestion. Various things can affect that. Hormonal imbalances. I mean, all of this stuff plays together. That's an important thing to understand, is everything we've said so far, they're all connected in a web of relation in some way, and working on each one will help the other one, and working on both will help each other. So it's all very much interconnected. But being up and down like that is definitely something to keep in mind. And as if you can relate to that, that it affects your ability to go throughout your day as the person that you ultimately want to be, or to show up the way that you want to show up. Number 13 is a poor image of yourself in the world. And this kind of overlaps with insecurity. I probably could have made it one, but I guess it is different. What I'm thinking with this one is a poor self-image, just really feeling, I guess it is pretty close to insecurity, but especially when that reflects out to the world, when we see everybody else as negative, or we see all circumstances as not going to work out, we're very pessimistic about things. A lot of times this does reflect, in our inner state. We see the outside oftentimes how we see the inside, and vice versa. It can like kind of oscillate back and forth depending on what's going on internally or externally. But poor self-image, again, is something that when you get down to the root of most people, it's why we need tons of sneakers and nice clothes, and we want different cars, and we want people to validate everything that we do. And there's again, none of these things are inherently bad, but I think in the modern world, most of us, whether we realize it or not, gravitate toward them, or are being pulled in those directions out of a place of insecurity and poor self-image. And that ultimately affects us in a lot of ways. The next one, number 14, is going to be digestive issues. So what we're talking about here is, and this has been a big one for me. This was kind of how I got into this work. Again, it's almost 10 years ago now, but having serious gas, foul gas after eating certain things, having IBS like symptoms, pooping a bunch, maybe like, more than would be normal throughout the day, maybe a lot in the morning. On the reverse end, being constipated, getting bloated. But anything that affects digestion affects your brain, period. Anything that affects your digestive tract and your gut, your intestines, it will affect the brain. It'll affect how we feel, it'll affect how we think. So tuning into digestion is very important. And these are also very common, needing to take like Imodium for diarrhea or acid reflux, or drugs to help with these things. All of it comes down to digestive issues that are not that are again signs that we need to change things, signs that we need to restore balance in certain ways. So I think especially when it comes to mental health issues, anxiety, depression, ADD like things, trouble paying attention. I think it pervades every single mental health issue out there. I'm not going to get into some of the deeper ones, but digestion is super important. And when you get that right, you're really just taking the burden off of your body. So it's not, it can have a huge impact on mental health outlook, the way that we view ourselves, all of that. Number 15 is breathing rapidly, or the inability to slow down our breathing, let's say over the course of time or over the course of a minute. So what this means is if we breathe like this, in, out, in, out, in, out, when we're breathing rapidly like that, and it may not be that fast, but over a certain amount of breaths per minute is usually a sign that our body's out of balance, and it can be affected by not sleeping enough, too much sitting, not getting enough movement, eating poorly. But it's ultimately, all of those things will factor in, but ultimately our breathing needs attention, and it's why it's a significant component of my 6 physiological foundations for health and healing. Working on our breathing, learning to reconnect with our diaphragm, learning to slow down our breath. So again, instead of that rapid, we want an inhale, exhale, somewhere between 6 and 10 breaths per minute, maybe even less than that as we go, has profound impacts on the body and brain and on our health and well-being. But if you find yourself that you breathe largely into your chest, you can look in a mirror. I already have a YouTube video about this, but if you look in a mirror and you see your chest rising and falling when you're breathing, it's a sign of dysfunctional breathing. And very much watch that video, but very much that will impact your brain. That will put your body and mind into a fight or flight state, or help to keep it there, and completely alter your outlook, your sense of self, your sense of the world around you, sense of safety and security. So it's a very important thing, breathing. Very simple too, and easy to ignore because the body will do it by itself. But when we kind of take control and breathe deliberately, it can have profound impact on our health, our well-being, and as a result, our life. And then I'll throw in here, if I could, I would go back to the beginning and say that all of this stuff, the need for healing, the need for being healthier, the purpose of all of it is so that we can show up more fully. It is so that we can hopefully live longer because we're doing something meaningful, because we have family we care about and friends that we care about, and because we find a way of enjoying life, to have the energy to do the things that we want to do. I feel very strongly that so many people in this world lack purpose. We lack purpose and meaning, and we don't really know where to find it. But in my opinion and experience, the best way to find purpose is to start to live purposefully or intentionally. Take some of these things and start to live intentionally in a way that your brain, your biology, your body, your brain, your spirit becomes something more expanded. You start to tap into, your potential, let's say, what has been, just piled on with all of this crap that most of us deal with: thoughts, emotions, experiences, toxic food, dysfunctional ways of living. And when we unburden that, there's something different there. And I think that oftentimes purpose finds people that live purposefully. Purpose will find you if you take seriously making yourself worthy of purpose. It's not always that way. I mean, some people just, know what they want to do, or they have something they're very drawn to. But when it's not there, or even if it is there, this kind of thing, returning to a state of wholeness, returning to a higher state of health, it that is the reason to do it, so that you can be and become like what you want to be in this life. All right, number 16 sign that you need healing is excessive sitting. If you and I don't know anybody in this world who hasn't, we go through the school system, so most of us sit most of our childhood, or a significant portion of it, which is, unfortunately incredibly destructive. But one of the things that sitting tends to do is tighten our hip flexors, our psoas muscles, which are, affect our diaphragm, and it impacts our ability, going back to, the breathing. It impacts our ability to properly breathe with our diaphragm. And what happens with that, when this is all constricted, we can't tap into the part of our breathing properly that tells our body that it's okay to settle down, that tells our body that it's safe. And what happens as a result is we get stuck in states of fear. We get stuck in states of pessimism. We get stuck in states of feeling on edge all the time, even when it's like we should just be able to wind down and chill out. So it's sort of like the very first quote that this is more of just something to identify with. But if you sit excessively, it's going to impact your brain, your body. It's going to impact everything. And learning how to breathe properly, learning how to loosen these things up, taking time, even getting like a children's ball, something soft, not a soft ball, but something about that size but softer, laying on that in the morning or in the evening, or ideally when you haven't just eaten, and breathing, allowing the musculature of your abdomen, diaphragm to breathe against the ball, to just start to loosen all of that up, can have such a profound impact. If you try that for 5 minutes, I guarantee you will rise from that ball and feel calmer and feel a deeper sense of well-being, just from opening up that area of your body and allowing the breath to come down there. The next one, number 17, is frequent headaches. Not going to go too far into this, but frequent headaches are not normal. Having to medicate with Tylenol or painkillers all the time is not only not normal, but that is destructive to the body. These types of things are highly unsafe, and will lead to liver issues, gut issues. And I understand that, it was me back in the day being like, whatever, like I just don't want a headache. I don't really care about my liver or my gut. Why should I? But this all impacts the way you think, the way you feel, your body's ability to get rid of the crap that it doesn't want in there. And we tend to just be disconnected from the fact that all of this stuff is often why we don't feel the way that we want to, or we don't feel the way that we know we could, or that we feel like we need to in order to live fully. So something to keep in mind. Another sign that you are in need of healing, number 18, so we're going to do 19, this is second to last, is that you currently eat a lot of junk food, or you grew up eating a lot of junk food, as did I. Nobody really in this world, especially if you go through the food system or the school system with, crappy cafeteria food. And, thank God we're not starving. It's not to be ungrateful about it, but we're kind of in the reverse direction. We're gluttonous to the point that we are starving and empty, because what we eat excessively has nothing there. It's not nourishing. It doesn't bring balance to our bodies. It's not what we need. And nutrients, I alluded to this term earlier, but the best way to think of nutrition are the building blocks for your brain and body. So if you're deficient in nutrients, you're not going to feel as good. You're not going to have energy. You're not going to be able to think as clearly. You're going to feel off and depressed and anxious and things like that. Like, nutrient deficiencies are a huge underlier of mental health issues, of chronic fatigue, of even being unable to sleep, all of this stuff. So if you eat a lot of junk food, and especially if you find it, and I can totally empathize with this, but find it hard to stop, like you just excessively crave sugar or, you know, just crappy, junky food. It's not just you. It's not just your brain. I mean, part of it is addiction in that way, but we get significant imbalances in our microbiome, and most of us are walking around with pounds and pounds of invisible bacteria and microorganisms and worms and parasites and all these things. And when that stuff gets used to eating junk food and gets, our body intelligently kind of allows some of this to process the junk food that tends to be toxic, those things can release, chemicals and byproducts into our body, into our bloodstream, that tell our brain, I need to eat this food. I need something like junky. I need that excessive sugar type of snack. It's oftentimes that we're feeding these other things, and that might be weird to think about, but it's a hard fact. Like, that's there, and that underlies too a lot of nutrient deficiencies and further issues, having an imbalance of these. What seems to be weird, but we have a whole little like backyard in our digestive tract. The last one is chronic pain, and I don't necessarily just mean pain from like an injury. Maybe you were lifting or you had an incident playing sports or something like that. It could fall in this, but chronic pain in other senses is often tied to emotional reasons, let's say. It's been a big part of where my attention has been recently, is understanding more of the fascia, the connective tissue in the body, and understand that it's a living organism, and that our fascia, what is lining our muscles and wraps us from head to toe, actually looks like where we store our memories and where we store emotional upsets and traumas and things like that. But oftentimes, depending on where we have chronic pain, it correlates with certain things that have happened, maybe issues with family, issues with friends, certain instances that affected us in our lives. So it's just something to keep in mind oftentimes if that is the case. Now, this also doesn't, there can be this component of addressing emotional issues, and I'm certainly not against that from a mental health perspective. Like, I think learning to see the world differently, learn to relate to our thoughts in a more optimal way is useful and necessary. But I also think going to the body is really important. And when we're talking about the fascia and things, body work, learning to trigger point and foam roll. Like, when I first started just with a simple lacrosse ball, doing trigger pointing, if you're not familiar, it's basically like you could put a ball against the wall and like lean your hip against it, dig your hip in, dig under your armpit, your lat, maybe dig your chest in, your shoulders, your back, your traps, like anywhere, and really dig in there. And you start to have these releases. When I started doing that back about 8 years ago, I was living alone in an apartment in 2015, and I would very often just take a lacrosse ball, put on a podcast, and like dig in. But I had these tremendous like release of emotions, things about family, especially family tends to correlate with like low back and hips. But when I would work on those areas, just this stuff come up, these emotional releases, and I'm thoroughly convinced that I still have a lot of that there, but I've experienced enough to know that that is true and worth pursuing. But it's something to keep in mind, because we often get stuck in chronic pain, and it can very much negatively impact, again, our ability to live our lives if we're in pain. And there's a point where that we deal with that, we bear our cross per se, but there's also places for further healing, and sometimes these pains can correlate with the inability to forgive people, or like poor relationships in certain senses. So I do think it's still worth pursuing or working to heal, not just for ourselves but for other people. And again, it's with all of this, like, this can become, if you're not careful, the idea of needing to heal or improving health, or any way of looking at this, it can very much become a self-obsessive and just too focused on like being in this perfect state of health, which is never going to happen. It's not that this world, especially, there are so many things beyond our control. But the point is that we need to control the things that we can so that we're not breaking down, so that we're not becoming infertile, so that we're not becoming like unable to live and do the things that we, want and need to do so that we can, properly carry ourselves and lead a family and participate in our communities and all of that. So, I very much want to emphasize and want to encourage and invite you to think about this as extending outward, as you filling up your cup so that you can then pour it out into the world and to other people. And yeah, that's not always, well, I think that it comes, the more that we're really doing this work, the more that becomes obvious where we need to pour ourselves out, and where we can be useful and of service to other people. So I'm going to wrap up there for today. That's 19 concrete signs that you are in need of healing. And, this should be a celebrated thing. To me, the worst thing is when you have something that isn't right, but you have no idea why. You just think it's there, or maybe you've even, like, it happens so often with people. They go to a doctor, especially just like a typical mainstream doctor, and like can't figure out why this is happening, why you're getting headaches all the time, why you're fatigued. It's probably all in your head. And just knowing it's that there are reasons for it and that you can do things about it can be it is so important. It's so important. So this should be celebrated. If you have any of these things or you identify with this, and obviously the more that you identify with, probably the more you're in need of healing. It should be celebrated, and it's an invitation to step into a different way of living and a higher version of yourself, a better version of yourself, let's say, a more integrated version. So, I encourage you not to get down about any of it, and just to see that, I have it on the homepage on my website, but that, like, these things are often the opportunities that we need in this modern world in order to heal and to start to become the men that we need to be and that we're meant to be. So if you have any questions, or you really, are stuck at what to do with some of these, I mean, I've already developed the how-tos to go about dealing with some of these, but and I plan to continue doing that. But feel free to reach out if you're feeling stuck. I have on my website High Mileage Foods for Mental Health guide that you can download. It highlights the best foods for mental health and energy. All the energy is going to be a byproduct of that. They go hand in hand. And the worst ones, the things to just avoid. So it's a good start. It's a good place to get these foods in. It's going to help to start replenishing, get this stuff out. It's going to take the burden off of you. I also offer a free 30-minute basically conversation. I do coaching. We can discuss the potential for that, but even if you just need suggestions or direction, I'm happy to do that as well. Or you can send me an email at keith@risingstronger.com. Those other things that I mentioned, you can find on my website, risingstronger.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your attention. And until next time, I wish you well. I hope this was helpful for you. Goodbye. All right. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe, and head over to risingstronger.com. You can join my growing email list by entering your email address or downloading my free guide, the High Mileage Foods for Better Mental Health guide. I do offer a free 30-minute coaching consultation. You can sign up for that there as well. And again, I appreciate your time. I'll see you in the next episode.